have a 4% rule. I'm making this video because a YouTube channel that I watch that I really enjoy recently made a video on the 4% rule and how it could possibly be making you work longer and harder and farther and more years than you might have had to. The idea is, in stocks, there's a pretty simple math equation that says, I guess I won't be needing this, pretty simple math equation that says you can safely withdraw 4% from your stock portfolio after you retire. And the idea is there's two parts to the math equation. The first one is, in an average year, over a long enough timeline, stocks appreciate about 10%. Historical average, right? Some years are way more, some years is way less. And if you withdraw 4% to live on, that leaves enough for inflation, usually, and taxes, so that your portfolio will continue to grow in retirement so that you will not run out of money. You don't want to run out of money before you run out of life, right? That's the goal. So the idea is, the second math equation is, you take your annual spending and you times it by 25. It's weird. It's like pi, right? 22 divided by 7 is always 3.14. This number works out to the 4% rule. If you take your annual spending and you times it by 25, an example, you need $40,000 a year to retire, which would be okay with Social Security. Times that by 25 gives you $1 million. 4% of that gives you $40,000. In real estate, it doesn't work that way. It's not quite that simple. What we have that would be a 4% rule would be, what would be the number that you can safely retire on, where your portfolio would continue to grow to make up for things like taxes that you're eventually going to have to pay that I still haven't had to in a decade, or inflation. Now, the weird thing with real estate is your asset benefits from inflation. Your value actually goes up with inflation. I mean, that's the point of inflation. It's making less, it takes more currency to buy the same or less assets. So as the dollar is devalued, the assets that you own are going up in value. So for me, the way it worked for the 4% rule in real estate was two numbers, just like the 4% rule for people who invest in stocks. Apparently, I left a shop back here as I'm meeting a tenant for signing a lease. I'll be taking that with me. That doesn't come with the place. The 4% rule was to safely account for inflation and taxes. What the 4% rule doesn't account for is black swan events. So for me, one of the problems with the 4% rule is, what happens when a black swan event happens? So for me, the first thing with real estate is to realize you have, why is there sunlight in the bathroom in a state where it rains all the time? People are weird when they build stuff. So with real estate, I'm counting on black swan events happening. Rent control, legislation, lawsuit, all kinds of things that can happen that can cause problems for my real estate portfolio and make it to where I could have to go back to work. So I didn't just take my living expenses and make sure that my cash flow covered that. So what I did is, just like the 4% rule, I figured out what my living expenses were. That's my financial independence number. That's when I could change jobs and not worry about how much money I made. That is when maybe I didn't chase overtime so much, but it's not when I could retire. Retirement happened when I hit my financial freedom number. So it's not a 4% rule. It's a multiplier of your living expenses that you are comfortable with, since real estate already accounts for inflation, and because of levered depreciation and tax write-offs, we are accounting for taxes as well. So I feel as comfortable with somebody using the 4% rule with stocks, so that I Wish I could see the chat on my phone. I'll have to look at these after the message. If you want your questions answered during a live stream every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, I do live streams that last as long as the questions do, and I answer all of the questions, even the rude ones. I needed about $4,000 a month to live comfortably, right? I house hack, so I don't have a mortgage. I drive paid off vehicles. I travel to places like Colombia and Thailand, not Sweden and England, and places that cost a lot. I go to the places that don't cost a lot. So 4,000 was enough, but my multiplier, my black swan event number, that number that lets me feel comfortable knowing I won't have to go back to work, is on a sliding scale. The less you need to live comfortably, the bigger the multiplier you should have. If you need $1,000 a month, I think you should have 5,000 or 6,000 coming in before you retire. So we have 5 or 6 time multiplier. For me, I needed 4, so I went with a 4-time multiplier. When my cash flow from rental properties, this is after principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and after setting aside for repairs, maintenance, and vacancy, all those gotchas. After setting money aside, when my cash flow passed $16,000 a month, I felt kind of silly going to work. If you need $40,000 a month to live, I don't think you need maybe a 1.5, 60,000 a month coming in, or maybe 80, so a 2-point multiplier, right? The more you need to live your life comfortably, the smaller the multiplier can be in real estate for you to retire and walk away from your W-2 like I did. Now, it didn't happen overnight. Real estate is a get-rich-quick scheme. You have to understand that 10 years is quick. And the purpose of my content is to show that the average individual can reach financial freedom, make work completely optional, and retire in 10 years or less, even if you're not starting from the best position. And it seems like some of you need to be drugged, kicking and screaming to financial freedom with me. Like, why do people fight it so much? I did this walkthrough on this property. If you go back on my channel, the reason I had the mask in my hand was a tenant moved out and didn't leave the place in a very good state. And I wanted to come in and give it a walkthrough because while I trust my handyman, they're freaking amazing. You walk in and sign a lease with somebody. How much do you need to retire? And what method are you using? Do you use the 4% rule? Do you invest like Joe Kuhn, that YouTube channel that I should have named at the beginning of the video? He retired at 54. He's been retired for about 6 years. He used stocks. I don't own a stock. If I did, I think I'd still be working. He used the buckets method to be ready for those black swan events that I talked about that people use the 4% rule never really talk about. So he's got some solid strategies, and I watch him because of the transition of him going from working to retired and how he handled it, because I did the same thing. I retired a little over 2 years ago in 2022, so 2.5 years ago now. Wow, time flies. Especially when you don't have any Mondays anymore. I hope this information helps you. I hope you saw something here in the aftermath of how the tenant left it. I went with square plugs everywhere, replaced anything that was wrong. Oh no. There's nothing I can do. Sounds like a Bluetooth device hooked up. Somebody probably turned my truck on. Anyway, if you want your questions answered, I will see you Tuesday. Have a weekend